If we haven't met before, hi, I'm Sarah, an end-of-life planning advocate, normalizing conversations about end-of-life and estate planning before those conversations are necessary. As someone who works in end-of-life and estate planning, I think a lot about why people do and do not talk about death. As a result of all of this thinking, I have come up with a theory. Everybody fears death, but nobody fears death. Here's what I mean by that. Ask nearly anyone what they fear, and at or near the top of the list will be death. However, I've talked to very few people who actually literally fear death, the moment of biology and physiology where the heart stops and the brain function ceases. The fear is almost always of something else, of illness and decline, the pain that might come from that illness, a fear of becoming a financial or a physical burden, a fear of looking back at your life and not liking what you see, a fear of the afterlife or a lack thereof. And all of these things get lumped together as fear of death. But even in that very abbreviated list, depending on your circumstances, that's 10 or 15 years worth of activities. It makes sense that everyone is going to be able to find something within 10 years worth of activities to be afraid of. If you get specific, some might say a little pedantic, some of those fears, I would argue, aren't even about death. If you look back at your life and don't like what you see, to me, that is not a fear of death. While nearing death might make you think of it, that was likely a result of a fear of living your life. I don't think it's fair to blame that on death. But currently, these very different things that will take place over the course of years, if not decades, all get lumped together. And we hand wave it away with a let's not talk about that because it's a bummer, or let's not talk about that because it's scary. So no part of it is talked about. So none of it is dealt with. And the part I see the most, many people, too many people, never start estate planning. And as a result, those deaths are way worse than they need to be. Now, don't get me wrong. When a loved one dies, that will always be crushing and emotional. I don't know any way to prevent that. But when nothing has been discussed, when no plan has been made, when no paperwork has been completed, there is not only an emotional fallout, but a logistics fallout as well. Did mom want to be buried or cremated? Where did dad keep his bank accounts? I know brother kept amazing digital photos, but where are they? What is the password? How can I access them? The comparison I always think of is horror movies. The first rule of horror is that what you don't see is scarier than what you do see. The shark in Jaws is scary because you don't see the shark in Jaws. When you don't see the scary thing, everyone in the audience fills in the gaps with whatever it is they personally fear the most. Death, in many ways, is the same. They've decided that it's something we don't talk about, so death stays in the shadows. So everyone fills in the gap with whatever part of death or death-related or death-adjacent thing they fear the most. And since everyone has some element that they fear, we all agree that death is scary and shouldn't be talked about, and the cycle continues on and on. One of my favorite horror fiction podcasts is called Pseudopod. A link to the show will be in the show notes. Alistair, a frequent host, after the story comes on to give an outro about his thoughts on the story. A common refrain of his is, where is the horror? Or where is the fear? He encourages you to really try to figure out what you personally find unsettling in a story. If you really consider it, the horror often isn't where you think it is. Now, I can't get into the specifics of how to help you manage your fear of death. I am not qualified for that, and as I pointed out, a fear of death takes so many forms, there can't be a single way to manage or to face it. But I will give you a prompt to consider. Sure, chances are you fear some aspect of death. Most people do. I work in end-of-life and estate planning, and that doesn't make me immune to the fear. But consider this. What specifically do you fear? Is it illness, pain, decline, your life review, or your legacy? The spiritual aspects of death and the afterlife? What specifically do you fear? Is that fear something that you can maybe address and possibly minimize? For example, fear of illness and pain can somewhat be addressed in an advanced care directive or a living will. A fear of the spiritual aspects might be addressed by talking to a spiritual advisor. And even if you don't want to deal with or aren't ready to deal with your specific fear, there are likely some aspects of end-of-life or estate planning that you can complete that totally avoid the area that you're afraid of. For example, even if you aren't ready to deal with your issues about the afterlife, you can still write a will to make sure your earthly stuff gets distributed to the people you want to get it, or that your email password is documented to make it easier on your people to manage wrapping up your estate. So consider, what specifically do you fear? If you found this video helpful, hit that like button and consider also hitting the subscribe button for regular end-of-life and estate planning information.